Imagine being trapped in darkness for 5 years, knowing secrets that could destroy an entire plantation. In 1854, Mississippi, 14-year-old Ezekiel was locked away for speaking truths no one wanted to hear. But some knowledge refuses to stay buried. Before we begin this powerful story, please subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The heavy wooden door creaked shut. Complete darkness swallowed everything. The cotton fields stretched endlessly under the scorching Mississippi sun. Ezekiel wiped sweat from his brow, his small hands already calloused from years of labor, despite being only 14. "Boy, get over here!" Master Thornfield's voice cut through the humid air like a whip. Ezekiel's stomach dropped. He'd been picking cotton since dawn, his burlap sack nearly full. What had he done wrong now? He approached the main house, its white columns gleaming like bones in the afternoon heat. Master Thornfield stood on the wraparound porch, his face red with anger and something else, fear. "You been talking to my son Thomas?" Thornfield's eyes were bloodshot, wild. "No, sir," Ezekiel whispered, keeping his gaze down. "Haven't seen Master Thomas since yesterday." That was the truth. Thomas Thornfield, the master's 18-year-old son, had been found dead that morning in the creek behind the house. Drowned, they said. But Ezekiel had seen something else. "Don't lie to me, boy." Thornfield grabbed Ezekiel's shirt, lifting him off the ground. "Someone said you were muttering strange words near the creek last night." Ezekiel's heart hammered against his ribs. He had been near the creek. He'd seen Thomas arguing with someone in the shadows, heard angry voices, witnessed something that made his blood run cold. I was just praying, sir," Ezekiel stammered. "Praying?" Thornfield's laugh was harsh, bitter. What kind of prayers sound like devil's tongue? The truth was, Ezekiel had been speaking the words that came to him in dreams, words in a language he didn't understand but somehow knew, words that seemed to predict things before they happened, like Thomas's death. "Please, Master Thornfield, I don't know what you mean." Thornfield dropped him roughly. Ezekiel hit the ground hard, dust coating his clothes. "My son is dead," Thornfield whispered, his voice breaking. "And you knew something was going to happen, didn't you?" Ezekiel's mouth went dry. How could he explain the visions, the dreams that showed him glimpses of the future? The way words in an ancient language flowed from his lips when darkness fell. "I didn't know nothing, sir." But even as he said it, more words bubbled up in his throat. Foreign words that wanted to spill out. Words that spoke of more death coming to this cursed plantation. Thornfield studied him with narrowed eyes. "There's something unnatural about you, boy. Always has been." It was true. Ever since Ezekiel could remember, he'd been different. While other slave children played, he sat quietly, listening to voices only he could hear. While others slept peacefully, he tossed and turned with visions of things that hadn't happened yet. "Get back to work," Thornfield finally said. "But I'm watching you. We all are." As Ezekiel walked back to the fields, he felt eyes boring into his back. The other slaves whispered among themselves, casting fearful glances his way. Even old Sarah, who'd helped raise him, looked at him with suspicion. That night, as Ezekiel lay on his straw mattress in the slave quarters, the words came again, flowing from his lips like water from a broken dam. "Mors veniet, sanguis in terra, veritas, sepulta resurget." He didn't know what it meant, but he felt the truth of it in his bones. Death would come. Blood would stain the earth, and buried truths would rise again. Outside, an owl hooted mournfully. In the distance, he could hear Mrs. Thornfield weeping for her dead son. But Ezekiel knew Thomas's death was just the beginning. Something dark was stirring on the Thornfield plantation. Something that had been waiting in the shadows for years, feeding on secrets and lies. And somehow, Ezekiel was the key to it all. The words kept coming, faster now, more urgent. His voice rose in the darkness, speaking prophecies he couldn't understand, but felt with every fiber of his being. From the main house came the sound of running footsteps, angry voices, the crack of a whip being prepared. They were coming for him. The slave quarters erupted in chaos as Master Thornfield burst through the door with 3 overseers, their lanterns casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. "There he is!" Thornfield pointed at Ezekiel, who was still muttering in the strange language. "You hear that devil's tongue?" Ezekiel tried to stop the words, but they poured out of him like a river breaking through a dam. "Filius mortuus, pater mendax, mater shit veritatem." "Make it stop." Mrs. Thornfield appeared behind her husband, her face pale as moonlight. "Make him stop speaking about Thomas." But Ezekiel couldn't stop. The words had taken control, flowing through him with supernatural force. Around him, the other slaves cowered in their beds, pulling thin blankets over their heads. "Grab him!" Thornfield commanded. The overseers lunged forward, but as their hands touched Ezekiel, something extraordinary happened. Images flashed through his mind like lightning. Thomas Thornfield struggling in dark water, hands pushing him down, a figure in expensive clothes walking away. "No!" Ezekiel screamed, the vision so vivid it felt real. "He didn't drown, someone killed him." The words came out in perfect English this time, clear and accusatory. Thornfield went white. "What did you say?" "I saw it," Ezekiel gasped, the foreign words finally stopping. "In the creek, someone held him under the water, someone he trusted." Mrs. Thornfield let out a strangled sob. "He's lying. He's possessed by demons." But Ezekiel could see the truth in their eyes. They knew Thomas hadn't simply drowned. They'd suspected it all along. "Who?" Thornfield grabbed Ezekiel by the shoulders, shaking him violently. "Who did you see?" Before Ezekiel could answer, old Sarah stepped forward from the shadows. She was the oldest slave on the plantation, nearly 70, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Leave the boy alone," she said quietly. "He's not possessed. He's gifted." "Gifted?" Thornfield laughed harshly. "This is witchcraft." "No," Sarah shook her head. "My grandmother had the sight too. Could see things others couldn't, speak in the old tongues. It runs in bloodlines, passed down through generations." Ezekiel stared at her in shock. "Your grandmother?" "She was brought here from Africa when she was young," Sarah continued, "spoke the ancient languages of her people, could see the future in dreams and visions. The masters feared her, just like they fear you now." "I don't want to see these things," Ezekiel whispered. "I don't want to know what's coming." But even as he spoke, another vision began forming in his mind. Fire. Screaming. The plantation house engulfed in flames, and through it all, the sound of that strange language pouring from his lips. "What else do you see?" Mrs. Thornfield demanded, her voice shaking. "What else is going to happen?" Ezekiel looked at her, and for a moment he saw her not as the master's wife, but as a mother grieving her child. I see more death coming, unless the truth is told." "What truth?" Thornfield's voice was barely a whisper. "About why Thomas really died, about the secrets this house holds." The overseers exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a burly man named Jackson, stepped forward. "Master, maybe we should just get rid of the boy, quietly." "No, Mrs. Thornfield said suddenly. "If he can see things, if he knows what happened to Thomas, maybe he can help us find who did this." "Or maybe he did it himself," Jackson suggested. "Use some kind of voodoo magic." Ezekiel felt anger rising in his chest. "I would never hurt Master Thomas. He was kind to me. Sometimes he'd sneak me extra food when no one was looking." It was true. Unlike his father, Thomas had shown small kindnesses to the slaves. He'd been different, gentler, which made his death even more tragic. "Then who?" Thornfield demanded. "If you can see so much, tell us who killed my son." Ezekiel closed his eyes, trying to summon the vision again. But all he saw was darkness and the sound of struggling in water. "I can't see their face," he admitted, "but I know they're still here, still on the plantation." The room fell silent except for the crackling of the lanterns and Mrs. Thornfield's quiet weeping. "This is madness," Jackson muttered. "We're listening to a slave boy's fantasies." But Thornfield was studying Ezekiel with new interest. "What else can you see? About the plantation? About our family?" Ezekiel hesitated. The visions that came to him were often dark, filled with tragedy and loss. Did they really want to know? "I see," he began, then stopped. The words that wanted to come out were in that strange language again, and he was afraid of what they might reveal. "Speak," Thornfield commanded. "Domus cadet, familia divisa, sanguis innocentium clamat." Old Sarah gasped. "The house will fall. The family will be divided. The blood of innocence cries out." "You understand what he's saying?" Mrs. Thornfield asked. Sarah nodded grimly. "Some of it. It's Latin, mixed with older tongues, languages of power and prophecy." "This is blasphemy," Jackson declared. "We should lock him up before he brings more curses on this place." "Maybe that's not such a bad idea," Thornfield said slowly. "Keep him somewhere safe until we figure out what to do with him." Ezekiel's blood ran cold. "Please, Master, I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want the visions to stop." But he could see the decision forming in Thornfield's eyes. Fear was stronger than reason, and fear was driving them to make a terrible choice. "There's an old root cellar under the house," Thornfield said. "Stone walls, solid door. He'll be safe there." "Safe?" Sarah stepped forward. "You mean imprisoned?" "For everyone's protection," Mrs. Thornfield added, "until we understand what's happening here." As the overseers moved toward him, Ezekiel felt the words rising again, more urgent than before. But this time, they spoke of his own future, years of darkness, isolation, and the slow erosion of hope. And somewhere in that darkness, the truth about Thomas's death would fester like an infected wound, poisoning everything it touched. The root cellar was a tomb of living stone. Ezekiel sat in complete darkness, his back against the cold wall, counting the days by the meager meals pushed through a slot in the heavy wooden door. 3 weeks had passed since they'd locked him away, and the visions had only grown stronger. "Boy," old Sarah's voice whispered through the door. "You awake?" "Miss Sarah?" Ezekiel scrambled to his feet, pressing his face against the rough wood. "Is that you?" "Hush now. I brought you some cornbread. Real food, not the slop they've been giving you." The slot opened, and Sarah's weathered hand pushed through a cloth bundle. Ezekiel grabbed it gratefully, tears stinging his eyes at this small kindness. "How are things up there?" he asked, unwrapping the warm bread. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Bad, real bad. 2 more slaves died this week. Found them in their beds, no marks on them, just gone." Ezekiel's stomach clenched. He'd seen this in his visions, death spreading through the plantation like a plague. Who? Young Marcus and his sister Ruth, both healthy as horses yesterday, dead by morning. The bread turned to ash in Ezekiel's mouth. Marcus was only 12, Ruth barely 10. They'd been among the few children who hadn't feared him. "Master Thornfield's going crazy," Sarah continued. "Says it's your doing, that you cursed this place." "I didn't curse anyone," Ezekiel whispered. "I just see what's coming." "I know, child, but fear makes people stupid, and right now everyone's scared." Through the stone walls, Ezekiel could hear the plantation coming to life above him, footsteps, muffled voices, the creak of floorboards. Sometimes, late at night, he heard crying, Mrs. Thornfield mourning her son. "Miss Sarah," he said carefully, "what do you know about my family? My real family?" Another long silence. Then, "Why you asking?" "The visions, they're getting stronger. And sometimes I see faces I don't recognize. A woman with kind eyes, a man with scars on his hands. They feel familiar." Sarah sighed deeply. "Your mama was brought here when you were just a baby. She was from a place far away across the ocean. Had the sight, just like you. What happened to her?" "Died when you were 3. Fever took her. But before she passed, she told me things. About where she came from. About the gift that runs in your blood. Ezekiel pressed closer to the door. What kind of things? She said her people were keepers of old knowledge, could speak to spirits, see across time. The white men called it witchcraft, but it was just understanding, seeing the connections between all things. Is that why the words come to me? The Latin and the other languages? Latin was the language of power in the old world. Your mama said the spirits sometimes speak through those who have the gift, using whatever words will be understood by those who need to hear. A chill ran down Ezekiel's spine. So when I speak those words, you're not just seeing the future, child. You're speaking for the dead, for those who can't speak for themselves. Above them, footsteps thundered across the floor, angry voices, the sound of something heavy being dragged. What's happening? Ezekiel asked. Sarah's voice was grim. They found another body. Jackson, the overseer, face down in the creek, same place where Thomas died. Ezekiel's blood ran cold. In his visions, he'd seen Jackson's death, but not how or when, only that it was connected to Thomas somehow. Miss Sarah, I need to tell you something about the night Thomas died. What about it? I saw who killed him. Not their face, but I know it was someone from the main house, someone Thomas trusted. Sarah was quiet for so long that Ezekiel wondered if she'd left. Finally, she spoke. That's a dangerous thing to know, child. I think Jackson knew too. That's why he's dead. You think someone's killing people to keep them quiet. I think someone's trying to bury the truth, but the dead won't stay quiet. They're speaking through me, demanding justice. As if summoned by his words, the familiar sensation began building in his chest, the strange language rising like a tide. Veritas non moritur, sanguis innocentium testimonium dat, murderer inter nos habitat. What's it saying? Sarah whispered. Ezekiel translated as the words flowed through him. Truth does not die. The blood of innocence bears witness. The murderer lives among us. Lord, have mercy, Sarah breathed. The visions came then, stronger than ever before. Ezekiel saw the main house as if from above, its rooms laid bare like a dollhouse. In the master bedroom, he saw Thornfield pacing frantically. In the parlor, Mrs. Thornfield sat staring at a portrait of Thomas. And in the study, he saw someone else, someone unexpected, rifling through papers by candlelight, someone who shouldn't have been there. Miss Sarah. Ezekiel gasped as the vision faded. I know who killed Thomas, and Jackson, and why. Who? But before he could answer, heavy footsteps approached the cellar door, multiple people moving with purpose. Sarah! Thornfield's voice boomed. Get away from that door. I was just bringing the boy some food, Sarah replied, but Ezekiel could hear the fear in her voice. No one feeds him without my permission, and no one talks to him. He's dangerous. He's just a child. He's a demon. Mrs. Thornfield's voice was shrill, hysterical. Ever since we locked him up, more people have died. He's cursing us from down there. Please, Ezekiel called out, I can help you find the real killer. I know who... Silence, Thornfield roared. Not another word, or I'll have that door bricked up with you inside. Ezekiel heard Sarah being dragged away, her protests fading as they forced her back to the slave quarters. Alone again in the darkness, Ezekiel felt despair settling over him like a heavy blanket. He had the answers they needed, but they were too afraid to listen. The words came again, softer this time, almost like a lullaby. Patientia, veritas, tempus habet, justitia veniet, patience. Truth has its time. Justice will come, but as the days stretched into weeks and the weeks into months, Ezekiel began to wonder if justice would come too late for him. In the darkness of the cellar, he could only wait and watch through his visions as the plantation slowly destroyed itself from within. The killer was still out there, still free, and Ezekiel was the only one who knew the truth. 2 years had passed in the suffocating darkness of the cellar. Ezekiel had grown taller, thinner, his voice deeper when he spoke the ancient words that came to him nightly. His 16th birthday had come and gone unmarked, measured only by the changing seasons he felt through the stone walls. The plantation above had changed too. Through his visions, he watched as fear consumed the Thornfield family like a cancer. 7 more people had died in mysterious circumstances, slaves and overseers alike. The cotton fields lay partially abandoned, many slaves having run away in terror. Boy. The voice at the door was new, not Sarah. She died 6 months ago, found in her bed with no explanation, just like the others. Who's there? Ezekiel's voice was hoarse from disuse. Name's Benjamin. I'm the new overseer. Ezekiel pressed his ear to the door. Benjamin's voice was different from the others, educated, with a slight northern accent. Master Thornfield wants to talk to you, Benjamin continued. Says you might have information about what's been happening here. He wouldn't listen before. Things have changed. His wife, she's not well, hasn't spoken in weeks, just sits in Thomas's room, staring at nothing. Ezekiel had seen this in his visions. Mrs. Thornfield's mind had finally snapped under the weight of grief and guilt. Will you come up? Talk to him? Ezekiel hesitated. After 2 years of imprisonment, the thought of sunlight and fresh air was almost overwhelming. But he also knew the danger. The killer was still out there, still protecting their secret. I'll come, he said finally, but I want protection. The person who killed Thomas and the others, they're still here. The door opened for the first time in 2 years. Ezekiel squinted against the lantern light, his eyes streaming tears. Benjamin was a tall, lean man with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. Easy, Benjamin said, offering his arm for support. Take your time. Ezekiel's legs shook as he climbed the stone steps. The main floor of the house felt like another world, spacious, bright, filled with the sense of cooking food and fresh flowers. Master Thornfield waited in his study, but he was a shadow of his former self. His hair had gone completely grey, his face gaunt and haunted. He looked up as Ezekiel entered, and for a moment, neither spoke. You've grown, Thornfield said finally. Yes, sir. 2 years in that cellar. I'm sorry for that. Ezekiel studied the man who had imprisoned him. Thornfield's remorse seemed genuine, but it was too little, too late. You said you know who killed my son, Thornfield continued. I need to know. This plantation is dying. My family is destroyed. If you have answers... I do, Ezekiel said, but first I need to know. Are you ready to hear the truth? Even if it's someone you trust. Thornfield's hands trembled as he poured himself a glass of whiskey. At this point, I don't trust anyone. Ezekiel closed his eyes, letting the visions flow through him. He saw that night 2 years ago with perfect clarity now. Thomas walking to the creek, meeting someone in the shadows, the argument that followed. Your son discovered something, Ezekiel began. Something about money being stolen from the plantation accounts. He confronted the thief that night by the creek. Who? Thornfield's voice was barely a whisper. Someone who had access to your books. Someone you trusted completely. Before Ezekiel could continue, footsteps echoed in the hallway. The study door opened, and Mrs. Thornfield entered, her eyes vacant and unfocused. Thomas? She said, looking directly at Ezekiel. Thomas, is that you? Ezekiel's heart clenched. In her madness, Mrs. Thornfield saw her dead son in every young man's face. No, ma'am, he said gently. It's Ezekiel. Her face crumpled. Of course. Thomas is dead. My beautiful boy is dead. She turned to leave, but Ezekiel felt the words rising in his throat. Not the ancient languages this time, but a message meant specifically for her. Mrs. Thornfield, he called out. Thomas wants you to know he forgives you. She froze in the doorway. Forgives me for what? For not protecting him, for not seeing the danger that was right under your nose. Tears streamed down her face. I should have known. I should have seen. You couldn't have known, Ezekiel said softly. The killer was too clever, too trusted. Mrs. Thornfield looked at him with sudden clarity, as if the fog in her mind had lifted for a moment. You really can see him, can't you? You can see my Thomas. Sometimes he's at peace now, but he wants justice for what was done to him. Then tell us, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. Tell us who killed our son. Ezekiel looked between the grieving parents, then at Benjamin, who stood quietly by the door. The moment of truth had arrived. It was... The study door slammed shut. The lamp went out, plunging them into darkness. In the confusion, Ezekiel heard a struggle, a muffled cry, then silence. When Benjamin managed to relight the lamp, Mrs. Thornfield lay unconscious on the floor, and Master Thornfield was gone. "Where is he?" Benjamin demanded, helping Mrs. Thornfield to a chair. Ezekiel closed his eyes, reaching out with his gift. The vision came immediately. Thornfield being dragged through the house by a figure in dark clothes, a knife pressed to his throat. "The barn," Ezekiel gasped. "They're taking him to the old tobacco barn." Who has him?" But Ezekiel was already moving, his weak legs carrying him toward the door with desperate urgency. After 2 years of imprisonment, he finally had the chance to expose the truth. He just prayed they wouldn't be too late. Behind them, Mrs. Thornfield whispered her son's name like a prayer, her brief moment of clarity already fading back into madness. The killer had made their move at last, and Ezekiel was the only one who could stop them. The tobacco barn stood like a monument to decay at the edge of the plantation, its wooden walls weathered grey by years of neglect. Ezekiel's bare feet slipped on the dew-covered grass as he and Benjamin approached through the darkness. "Stay back," Benjamin whispered, drawing a pistol from his coat. "If what you're saying is true, this person has killed 9 people. They won't hesitate to kill more." But Ezekiel shook his head. "They need me alive. I'm the only witness to what really happened that night. They've been waiting for the right moment to silence me permanently." Through a crack in the barn wall, they could see flickering candlelight inside. Voices carried on the night air, one pleading, one cold and determined. "Please," Master Thornfield was saying, "we can work this out. Whatever you've done, we can fix it. Fix it?" The second voice was familiar, but Ezekiel couldn't quite place it. "You think you can fix 2 years of suspicion? 2 years of watching that boy's vision slowly reveal the truth?" Ezekiel's blood ran cold. The killer had been listening to his prophecies, waiting to see how much he really knew. "I trusted you," Thornfield continued, his voice breaking. "After my son died, you were the one who comforted us. You helped us through the darkest time of our lives. And I've been protecting myself ever since. Do you think I wanted to kill Thomas? He was like a brother to me." Benjamin grabbed Ezekiel's arm. "Do you recognize the voice?" Ezekiel strained to listen, and suddenly the pieces fell into place. The educated accent, the intimate knowledge of the family, the access to the plantation's financial records. "Dr. Morrison," he whispered. "The family physician." It made perfect sense. Dr. Morrison had been treating the Thornfield family for years. He had access to the house, the trust of the family, and the medical knowledge to make deaths appear natural. "Thomas discovered you were stealing from his father's accounts," Thornfield was saying inside the barn. "That's why you killed him." "I wasn't stealing," Dr. Morrison's voice rose in anger. "I was taking what was owed to me. Do you know how many times I've treated your slaves for free? How many nights I've ridden through storms to save your family's lives? Your father promised me a partnership in this plantation, but when he died, you conveniently forgot that promise. So you decided to take it by force? I decided to take what was mine. Small amounts at first, nothing you'd notice. But Thomas was always too clever for his own good. He found the discrepancies in the books. Ezekiel felt the familiar stirring of visions in his mind. He saw that night 2 years ago with perfect clarity. Thomas confronting Dr. Morrison by the creek, the argument escalating, the moment when Morrison's desperation turned to violence. "You held him under the water," Ezekiel said, his voice carrying through the barn walls. "You watched him drown." Silence fell inside the barn. Then Dr. Morrison's voice, cold and calculating. "Come inside, boy, both of you. And don't try anything heroic, or Mr. Thornfield dies right now." Benjamin looked at Ezekiel. "We could run, get help." "There's no time," Ezekiel replied. "And besides, this needs to end tonight. Too many people have died already." They pushed open the barn door and stepped inside. Dr. Morrison stood in the center of the space, holding a knife to Thornfield's throat. He was a man in his 40s, well-dressed despite the late hour, with the steady hands of a surgeon and the cold eyes of a killer. "The famous prophet," Morrison said, studying Ezekiel. "Do you know how much trouble you've caused me? Every time you spoke those ancient words, every vision you shared, you came closer to exposing the truth." "So you killed anyone who might have listened to me," Ezekiel said. "Jackson, because he was starting to ask questions. Old Sarah, because she understood what my visions meant. Collateral damage. I used my medical knowledge to make their deaths appear natural. A little poison here, a stopped heart there. No one suspected the kindly family doctor." Thornfield struggled against the knife. "You monster! These people trusted you." "And I've kept your family's secrets for years," Morrison snapped. "Your father's drinking, your mother's laudanum addiction, your own gambling debts. I've been cleaning up Thornfield messes my entire career." Ezekiel felt the ancient words rising in his throat, but this time they came with images, visions of Morrison's own past, his own secrets. "Peccata patris, filius damnatione, medicus mortis." "What's he saying?" Benjamin asked. Ezekiel translated as the visions flowed through him. The sins of the father, the son's damnation, the physician of death. Morrison's face went pale. "Stop that. Stop speaking that devil's tongue." But Ezekiel couldn't stop. The visions were too strong, showing him Morrison's deepest shame. "You're not just a thief and a murderer. You're running from something else, aren't you? Something you did up north before you came here." "Shut up! You killed patients there too. That's why you had to leave. That's why you came to this remote plantation where no one would ask questions about your past." Morrison's hand shook, the knife wavering at Thornfield's throat. "You don't know anything." "I know you're a coward," Ezekiel said, stepping closer. "I know you've been living in fear for 2 years, watching as my visions slowly revealed your crimes. I know you're terrified that the dead won't stay silent." "The dead are silent," Morrison screamed. "They're just rotting meat in the ground." But even as he said it, something changed in the barn. The temperature dropped noticeably. The candles flickered as if touched by an unfelt wind. Ezekiel felt them then, the spirits of all those who had died. Thomas, Jackson, old Sarah, and the others. They pressed close around him, lending him their strength. "They're here," he whispered. "All of them. They want justice." Morrison looked around wildly, seeing nothing but feeling the presence that filled the barn. "This is madness. You're just a slave boy with delusions." "Then why are you so afraid?" The knife slipped in Morrison's sweating hand. Thornfield broke free, stumbling toward Benjamin. "It's over," Benjamin said, raising his pistol. "Drop the knife, Doctor." But Morrison wasn't finished. With a snarl of rage, he lunged at Ezekiel, the blade aimed at his heart. Time seemed to slow. Ezekiel saw the knife coming, saw his own death in Morrison's wild eyes. But he also saw something else, a figure stepping between them, translucent, but unmistakably real. Thomas Thornfield, still 18, still wearing the clothes he died in, caught Morrison's wrist in an iron grip. Morrison screamed, his hand burning where the spirit touched him. The knife clattered to the ground. "Thomas?" Thornfield whispered, staring at his son's ghost. The spirit turned to his father, smiled sadly, then faded away. Morrison collapsed, clutching his burned hand, babbling incoherently about ghosts and devils. "It's over," Ezekiel said, exhaustion washing over him. Finally, it's over. But as Benjamin secured Morrison and Thornfield wept for his son, Ezekiel felt a new vision forming. This one showed him his own future, not the freedom he'd hoped for, but something far more complicated. The truth was out, but the consequences were just beginning. 3 months after Dr. Morrison's arrest, the Thornfield plantation buzzed with an energy it hadn't felt in years. Word of Ezekiel's supernatural abilities had spread throughout Mississippi like wildfire, bringing visitors from across the South. Ezekiel sat in the main parlor, the same room where he'd once been forbidden to enter, watching as yet another wealthy family pleaded for his help. Mrs. Beaumont from Natchez clutched a lace handkerchief, tears streaming down her powdered face. "Please," she begged. "My daughter vanished 3 weeks ago. The authorities have found nothing. If you could just see something." Ezekiel closed his eyes, reaching out with his gift. The visions came easier now, clearer since his confrontation with Morrison. He saw a young woman with golden hair, alive but frightened, hidden in a cabin deep in the bayou. "She's safe," he said gently, "taken by a man who believes he loves her, but she'll be home within the week." Mrs. Beaumont sobbed with relief. "How can I ever repay you?" "Just bring her home safely," Ezekiel replied. As the Beaumont family left, Master Thornfield entered the parlor. The man had aged years in the past months, but there was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Another satisfied customer," Thornfield observed, settling into his favorite chair. "I don't like calling them customers," Ezekiel said. "These people are suffering. They need hope. And you give it to them. Do you know what they're calling you in town? The prophet of Thornfield Plantation." Ezekiel shifted uncomfortably. The attention made him uneasy, especially since he was still technically enslaved. Thornfield had promised him freedom papers, but they hadn't materialized yet. "Master Thornfield," Ezekiel began carefully, "about those papers we discussed." "Soon," Thornfield said, but his eyes didn't meet Ezekiel's. "There are complications." Before Ezekiel could ask what kind of complications, Benjamin entered the room. The former overseer had become something of a manager for Ezekiel's consultations, screening visitors and maintaining order. "We have a problem," Benjamin announced. "There's a group of men outside. They're not here for a consultation." Through the window, Ezekiel could see a dozen riders in dark clothes, their faces hard and unfriendly. At their head rode a man he recognized, Sheriff Caldwell from the county seat. "What do they want?" Thornfield asked, though his pale face suggested he already knew. "They're calling Ezekiel a dangerous influence," Benjamin replied. "Say he's spreading unrest among the slave population with his supernatural claims." Ezekiel's stomach dropped. He'd heard whispers of this. Plantation owners worried that his abilities might inspire other slaves to claim special powers, or worse, to rebel against their masters. "There's more," Benjamin continued grimly. "They have a warrant, signed by Judge Harrison himself." "A warrant for what?" Thornfield demanded. "Practicing witchcraft, inciting rebellion, corrupting the natural order." The charges were absurd, but Ezekiel knew they didn't need to be true to be dangerous. In the antebellum South, the mere suggestion of supernatural influence among slaves was enough to spark panic. "I'll handle this," Thornfield said, rising from his chair. "Ezekiel is under my protection." Drake. But as they watched through the window, more riders appeared on the horizon. Word had spread quickly, and it seemed half the county had come to see the witch slave dealt with. "Master Thornfield," Ezekiel said quietly, "maybe it's time for me to leave. I could head north, find my way to freedom." "Absolutely not. You're too valuable." Thornfield stopped himself, but the damage was done. "Valuable." Ezekiel stared at him. "Is that all I am to you? A source of income?" "That's not what I meant, isn't it? You've been charging people for my visions, taking money from desperate families while promising me freedom that never comes." The truth hung in the air between them like a poison cloud. Thornfield had indeed been profiting from Ezekiel's gift, using the money to rebuild his failing plantation. "You're still a slave," Thornfield said finally, his voice cold. "Don't forget that." The words hit Ezekiel like a physical blow. After everything they'd been through, after he'd solved Thomas's murder and brought peace to the family, he was still nothing more than property. "Then I guess we understand each other," Ezekiel replied, his own voice turning hard. Outside, Sheriff Caldwell dismounted and approached the house with several deputies. Benjamin met them at the door, but Ezekiel could hear the conversation through the open windows. "We're here for the slave called Ezekiel," Caldwell announced, "by order of the county court." "On what grounds?" Benjamin challenged. "Practicing witchcraft, corrupting other slaves, and disturbing the peace. We have witnesses who say he's been claiming to speak with the dead." "He solved a murder case," Benjamin protested. "He helped bring a killer to justice." "He's a slave with delusions of grandeur," Caldwell replied, "and he's becoming a dangerous influence. Other plantations are reporting unrest among their slaves, all claiming to have visions like this boy." Ezekiel felt the familiar stirring of his gift, but this time the vision that came was of his own future, and it was dark. He saw himself in chains, transported to a place where his abilities would be studied and ultimately destroyed. "They're going to kill me," he said quietly. Thornfield looked at him sharply. "What did you see?" "Not here, not today, but eventually. They're too afraid of what I represent." "And what's that?" Ezekiel met his eyes steadily. "Hope, the possibility that some people are more than what others try to make them." For a moment Thornfield's mask slipped, and Ezekiel saw genuine regret in the older man's face. But it was too late for regrets. The front door burst open, and Sheriff Caldwell strode in with his deputies. "There he is," Caldwell said, pointing at Ezekiel. "The witch boy himself." "He's not a witch," Thornfield protested weakly. "He's just gifted. Gifted by the devil, maybe. Either way, he's coming with us." As the deputies moved toward him, Ezekiel felt the ancient words rising in his throat one more time. But these words weren't a prophecy, they were a promise. "Libertas veniet, veritas non morietur, justitia temporis est." "What's he saying?" Caldwell demanded. Ezekiel translated his own words, his voice ringing with power. "Freedom will come. Truth will not die. Justice belongs to time." The deputies hesitated, unnerved by the authority in his voice. "It's just words," Caldwell snapped. "Take him." But as they reached for Ezekiel, something extraordinary happened. Every slave on the plantation, dozens of men, women, and children, appeared in the doorway and windows surrounding the house. They didn't speak. They didn't threaten. They simply stood there, bearing witness. "What are they doing?" one deputy whispered. Ezekiel understood. They were showing him that he wasn't alone, that his gift had given them something precious, the knowledge that they were more than what their masters claimed. "They're remembering who they are," Ezekiel said softly, and in that moment, he realized that his true purpose wasn't to serve the Thornfields or entertain wealthy visitors with parlor tricks. It was to remind his people that they had power too, even if it cost him everything. 5 years later, 1859. The small cabin in the Ohio woods was nothing like the grand plantation house where Ezekiel had spent his youth, but it was his, truly his. The freedom papers in his pocket, earned through 2 years of legal battles after his dramatic escape from Mississippi, proved it. "Ezekiel?" a gentle voice called from the doorway. "Your visitors are here." He looked up from the letter he was writing to see Mary, the Quaker woman who had become his closest friend and confidant. Behind her stood a young couple, their faces etched with the familiar desperation he'd seen so many times before. "Mr. Freeman," the man stepped forward hesitantly. "We're the Johnsons. We wrote to you about our son." Ezekiel set down his pen and gestured for them to sit. At 21, he had grown into a tall, dignified man whose eyes held depths of wisdom that seemed far older than his years. "Tell me about your boy," he said gently. Mrs. Johnson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "He's been missing for 3 months. The authorities say he probably drowned in the river, but we can't accept that, not without knowing for certain." Ezekiel nodded, understanding their pain. Since establishing himself as a spiritual consultant in the Free Territories, he'd helped dozens of families find missing loved ones, solve mysterious deaths, and bring closure to unfinished business. What was his name? Timothy. He was only 16, but so full of life. He wanted to join the abolitionists, help with the Underground Railroad. At the mention of the Underground Railroad, Ezekiel felt a familiar stirring. His own escape from the South had been aided by that network of brave souls, and he'd since become one of their most valuable assets, his visions helping to guide escaped slaves to safety. He closed his eyes and reached out with his gift. The visions came immediately, clearer and more controlled than they'd ever been in his youth. He saw a young man with sandy hair and determined eyes, not drowned but very much alive, hidden in a safe house in Pennsylvania, recovering from injuries sustained while helping a family of escaped slaves evade capture. "He's alive," Ezekiel said, opening his eyes. "Injured but alive. He's in a town called Lancaster, being cared for by friends." Mrs. Johnson gasped, her hand flying to her heart. "Are you certain?" "I see him clearly. He'll be home within the month, walking with a slight limp, but otherwise whole." The couple wept with relief, pressing money into Ezekiel's hands despite his protests. After they left, Mary settled into the chair across from him. "Another family reunited," she observed. "How many does that make this year?" 43, Ezekiel replied, "but it's not enough. There's so much suffering in the world, so many people who need help. You can't save everyone, Ezekiel. You've already done more than most people could in 10 lifetimes. It was true. In the 5 years since his escape, Ezekiel had become something of a legend in abolitionist circles. His ability to locate missing persons, predict safe routes for the Underground Railroad, and expose corruption had made him invaluable to the cause, but it had also made him a target. "Mary," he said carefully, "I need to tell you something. I've been having visions about the future, about what's coming to this country." She leaned forward, concerned. "What kind of visions?" "War. A great civil war that will tear the nation apart. It's coming soon, within 2 years, I think." Mary's face paled. "Are you certain?" "I see battlefields soaked in blood, brother fighting brother, hundreds of thousands dead before it's over." He paused, then added quietly, "But I also see something else. Freedom. Real freedom. For all people. The slaves will be freed, eventually. It won't be easy, and it won't be complete, but it will be a beginning." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set through the cabin windows. Then Mary spoke again. "Have you ever regretted it, leaving the plantation, giving up the comfortable life you could have had?" Ezekiel thought of Master Thornfield, who had died the previous year, alone, bitter, and broken by the loss of his son and the collapse of his world. He thought of the plantation itself, now abandoned and overgrown, a monument to a dying way of life. "No," he said finally. "I was never meant to be anyone's property. None of us were." A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Mary rose to answer it, returning with a young black woman whose clothes marked her as a recent escapee from the South. "This is Sarah," Mary said. "She's been traveling for 3 weeks, following the routes you mapped out." Ezekiel stood, recognizing the look in the woman's eyes, the mixture of hope and terror that marked all those who had risked everything for freedom. "Welcome," he said warmly. "You're safe now." Sarah's composure cracked, and she began to weep. They said there was a man up north who could see things, who could help people like me find their families." "What's your family's name?" "Washington. My husband Moses and our 2 children. They were sold away from our plantation 6 months ago. I don't even know if they're still alive. Ezekiel felt the familiar stirring of his gift. The visions came in a rush. A man working in a tobacco field in Virginia, 2 children in a kitchen in Maryland, all alive, all hoping for reunion. "They're alive," he said softly, "and I can help you find them." As he began to describe what he'd seen, Ezekiel felt a deep sense of purpose settle over him. This was why he'd been given his gift, not to entertain wealthy plantation owners or solve their petty problems, but to serve his people in their darkest hour. The ancient words rose in his throat one final time, but now they came with joy rather than sorrow. Libertas omnibus, spes non moriatur, amor vincit omnia. "What does it mean?" Sarah asked. Ezekiel smiled, translating the Latin that had once marked him as dangerous. "Freedom for all. Hope will not die. Love conquers everything." Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew. The sound of progress, of change, of a future where the color of a person's skin would no longer determine their destiny. It would take time. There would be more suffering, more struggle, more blood spilled before true equality was achieved. But it would come. Ezekiel had seen it in his visions, and he had learned long ago to trust what the spirits showed him. The boy who had once been locked in darkness for speaking forbidden truths was now a beacon of light for all those seeking freedom. And that, he knew, was exactly as it should be. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more powerful historical narratives. Hit that notification bell and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from, and what stories from history do you think deserve to be told? Your support helps us bring these important voices to light.